among workers who rushed for the call of duty in the aftermath of the 9/11 terror attacks on the World Trade Center. Many of them now being asked, what if you're a terrorist? We want to bring in our Mary Snow. Mary.
Well, Candy, starting in July, thousands of people seeking medical help for 9/11-related illnesses will have their names checked against an FBI terrorist watch list. The Huffington Post first reported the changes that are part of the contentious 9/11 health bill signed in January. And as one Ground Zero worker put it, it's like pouring salt on an open wound. To say John Fiel, an advocate for 9/11 responders and former Ground Zero worker, is angry would be an understatement. Here's why. Under the new 9/11 health bill, responders and Ground Zero workers seeking benefits will receive a letter notifying them that the act also requires the World Trade Center program administrator to determine whether a World Trade Center responder or survivor is on the terrorist watch list prior to his or her enrollment or certification. Fiel, who lost part of his foot at Ground Zero and suffers other health problems, calls that insulting.
When you risk your life without wondering about your own health and then get a letter in the mail asking if you're a terrorist, I mean, you're adding salt to an open wound that hasn't closed in 9.5 years.
That requirement to check names against a terror watch list was introduced by Congressman Cliff Stearns, a Republican from Florida. In a statement to CNN, he calls it a simple safeguard and says this protection is appropriate because under this legislation, workers, residents, students, passers-by, and anyone who was in the vicinity on 9/11 can join first responders and cleanup workers in submitting a claim for benefits. Stearns also points out there was no opposition to the amendment. We contacted New York Democratic Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who's been a fighter for 9/11 responders. In a statement, she said, regrettably, this amendment, which I felt was unnecessary, was just one of the compromises we had to accept to get the 9/11 health bill passed. But retired police officer James Ryder, who suffers 9/11-related health problems, says the idea of a terrorist trying to get these medical benefits confounds him.
To think that somebody would have done that and then stand or hang around to be illegally into this country and then hanging out to get compensation, knowing full well that they're going to get flagged somehow, somewhere, it just doesn't make any sense.
And Candy, the two Ground Zero responders we spoke with say they were aware that the amendment came up before the bill was passed, but they said they never thought it would come to fruition. Candy?
Adding insult to injury for those who got sick after being near Ground Zero in the wake of 9/11. Anyone seeking medical treatment under the new 9/11 health bill will have to run their names through an FBI terror screening database. It's all because of an amendment added by a congressman designed to keep terror suspects from getting any federal funds. Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with more. Hello, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Shannon. This story seems to be more evidence of the politics that always seem to surround the 9/11 attack. We've gone back to the legislation and we pulled that amendment, which is being billed by critics as controversial. It reads in part, no individual who is on the terrorist watch list maintained by the Department of Homeland Security shall qualify as an eligible WTC responder. Before enrolling any individual as a WTC responder in the WTC program under paragraph 3, the administrator, in consultation with the Secretary of Homeland Security, shall determine whether the individual is on such a list, a reference to the terrorist watch list. Now, this amendment was added by a Republican congressman of Florida, Cliff Stearns, whose aides say he was just trying to make sure that no one who worked at the site who was on the watch list would receive federal benefits. As you'll recall, this post-9/11 bill for first responders has had a very long history and it's bounced back and forth. And a lot of it happened at the end of last year with the Senate finally cutting a deal before Christmas and the House holding a lengthy voice vote before they adjourned for the holiday. And what seems clear now is that members of Congress agreed to this amendment to cut a larger deal, and now that it's being enforced, the first responders will likely have to provide names, places of birth, and other personnel data to get those benefits from the feds, and you can decide whether this is a reasonable thing to ask or not, Shannon.
Well, that bill has just been contentious from the get-go. Catherine, thank you.
New details on the 9/11 First Responders Law, which is set up to provide money to those who were exposed to the dangerous toxins down there and are now sick after working at Ground Zero. We're now learning a good deal more about that law and a provision that anyone who's seeking money must first prove that he or she is not a terrorist. You'll recall the law that provides more than $4 billion to help first responders pay their medical bills went through a highly publicized battle before Congress passed it last year. just days before Christmas. Our national correspondent Catherine Herridge with the news from Washington. So what exactly does this amendment say, Catherine?
Well, Shep, I've got a copy right here, and you can really decide for yourself what it ultimately means. No individual who is on the terrorist watch list maintained by the Department of Homeland Security shall qualify as a screening-eligible WTC survivor or a certified-eligible WTC survivor. Before determining any individual to be screening-eligible WTC survivor under Paragraph 1 or certifying any individual as a certified-eligible WTC survivor under Paragraph 2, the administrator, in consultation with the Secretary of Homeland Security, shall determine whether the individual is on such a list, and such a list is clearly a reference to the terrorist watch list, Shep. It's a lot of mumbo-jumbo from Capitol Hill, but I think you get the general impression of what it's trying to accomplish.
For sure. Who's behind it, and what is whoever these people are saying?
Well, the amendment was added by a Republican congressman of Florida, Cliff Stearns, whose aides say he was just trying to make sure that no one who worked at the site and who was on a watch list would receive federal benefits. And as you mentioned in the lead-in, this post-9/11 bill for first responders was involved in a very long back and forth on Capitol Hill. It went to the Senate, where the deal was eventually cut before Christmas, and then there was a lengthy vote from the House. So what we're looking at right now is members of Congress agreed to the amendment to cut a larger deal. That is now being enforced, and some of these first responders will probably have to provide some names. Though late today, I got an email from a former New York City firefighter who said he actually thought that this may not be a bad idea, though, of course, others would disagree.
There are at least 10 characteristics of the way these buildings came down that can be easily explained by the use of explosives. And not a single one of them can be explained without the use of explosives. So the fact that they came down at virtually free fall speed, that there was molten metal under the buildings. Molten metal needs temperatures far exceeding what fire can reach. Furthermore, the buildings came straight down. That's the whole purpose of controlled demolition of the type that we call implosion. There are only a few companies in the world qualified to do it. So the idea that somehow a plane hitting a building plus a fire would cause that building to come straight down. We're talking about over 300 steel columns, 47 core columns, over 200 columns around the perimeter. For the building to come down in a symmetrical way, so the building comes down as you see in the videos, all of those steel columns had to collapse simultaneously. For that to have occurred because of random fires throughout the buildings would be an absolute miracle. Furthermore, there are literally dozens of witnesses who report hearing explosions going off in the towers.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
It's not about justice, it's not about agenda, it's not about mobilizing people, it's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.
One more star in heaven. 9/11 was an inside job. Good night, everybody.
The United States of America is a terrorist base of operations. The United States of America is a friend to their evil plans.